everything they told you about Israel is a lie. No, seriously. By the end of this video, you'll be clear on what the core anti-Zionist libels are, how they work, and why they're bullshit. Let's do this! First, we need to understand how libels work. Libels succeed in part because they are based on bits and pieces of truth that are then distorted, misrepresented, and mashed together with blatant falsehoods until you've got a repeatable, unbeatable slogan that eschews reality and nuance for stupefying simplicity. That tiny kernel of something true is critical because it's what provides the libel with its sheen of authenticity. It's like if I gave you a point and you mixed it up with a bunch of other points and then flattened them all into a line. Yes, my point is technically in there somewhere, but all you see is a line, and at that point, my point is besides the point. You get the point. Libels are also inversion, meaning not only is Israel not guilty of them, but the Arab enemies who invented them are. Thus, libels serve the dual function of operating not only as a demonizing attack on Jews, but as a distraction that dupes the dupable into overlooking the actual evil being perpetrated upon Jews by their very accusers. Effed up, right? Libels also make for terrific slogans because they're easily repeated and function according to Brandolini's law, aka the bullshit asymmetry principle. Simply put, it's much easier to say something misleading, lazy, or wrong than it is to carefully dismantle it with facts, context, and precision. This is why libels are so effective and spread so easily. They beat lengthy explanations, they travel faster than corrections, and those of us trying to debunk them can appear defensive while nonsense looks confident. Throw in the availability heuristic, what's loudest and easiest to recall seems most true, and a dash of inattention blindness, missing complexity that isn't framed for you, and you've got yourself a solid foundation for a hate movement. All right, on to the libels. First up, alphabetically at least, apartheid. Hard T, by the way. The term comes to us from sunny South Africa, where you had a systemic, intentional, and permanent domination of one racial group over another, codified through law, policy, and state power, with the retention of the subordinate group necessary for the system benefiting the dominant group to continue functioning. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that is the legal criteria. Now, I found that when people accuse Israel of apartheid or of being an apartheid state, they either don't fully understand the actual specifics of the term, don't know anything about life on the ground in Israel, and or don't even know which part of the land from the river to the sea they're actually talking about. That land can be broken up into three distinct territories: Israel, Gaza, and the area west of the Jordan River known as the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, or most commonly, the occupied West Bank, but it all depends on who you ask. Anyone who has spent 10 seconds in Israel proper knows the accusation of apartheid there is absolutely ridiculous, as it's one of the most racially diverse places on planet Earth. More than 20% of the country is not Jewish. Everybody comes from everywhere, and everyone shares the same civil rights under the law. Everyone can vote, everyone can run for government, everyone can litigate in the same courts. The inclusion of Arab minorities is just that. Inclusion for those seeking to live in their ancestral home, or economic opportunity, or democracy, or LGBTQ rights, all of which are quite the opposite of a system built to retain Arabs as a labor class in order for Israeli society to function. Now, here's the kernel of truth. There are indeed instances of structural discrimination and inequality in the country. Why? Because it's a country with multiple ethnic groups living in it. And like many such countries, America, India, France, Japan, Estonia, Malaysia, they've got issues. Yet only Israel faces this constant barrage of apartheid accusations. I wonder what could be different about that one Jewish country surrounded by 57 Arab countries. Which brings us to the inversion. It is the Arab countries all across the Middle East and North Africa who have most closely resembled apartheid, although to be fair, they haven't technically checked the box either. But what they have done is suppress and segregate Jews as dhimmis for centuries and ethnically cleansed nearly 1 million Jews out of their centuries-old communities through legal and economic strangulation, seizing of assets, denationalization, and good old-fashioned violence, reducing the Jewish presence in the area by 99%. But you don't hear them talk about that on TikTok, do ya? Gaza doesn't even resemble apartheid, as before the war there wasn't a single Jew to be found in the territory at all since Israel unilaterally disengaged in 2005. Hard to argue you have two sets of laws for two peoples when there's only one group of people even allowed inside. You could talk about blockades, you can talk about airspace, you could talk about whatever you want, but you can't talk about apartheid because it flat out doesn't apply. As for the West Bank, that's a whole different can of worms. The Oslo Accords split the territory into 3 administrative zones that were meant to be temporary and technically still are, but here we are 30 years later. Area A, which is administered and secured by the Palestinian Authority, includes the major cities like Ramallah and Nablus, where most Palestinians live. Area B, which is administered by the PA and secured by Israel, contains the smaller cities and villages where the next big chunk of Palestinians live. Area C is where Israel has full civil and military control, and where most Israeli settlers live alongside less than 5% of the Palestinian population. It is in Area C where Israelis live under Israeli civil law and Palestinians live under Israeli military law. This is the part that most closely resembles one of the elements of apartheid. 2 laws for 2 people. But again, and this is precisely how libels work, it is distinctly not apartheid according to the very clear legal parameters of the term. The Israeli forces are not the state government because the West Bank is not part of the state of Israel. The dual legal systems are not due to racial differences or a desire to retain Palestinians as a permanent labor force, but because Israeli settlers are civilians of the occupying power and Palestinians are not. As with Gaza, there are plenty of issues we could talk about with this setup, but apartheid isn't one of them. And because we're constantly blasted with the vilifying shortcut libel, we never get to talk meaningfully about what's actually happening. Instead, we're just trapped in the "it is, no it isn't" binary that entrenches opposition, demonizes Israel exclusively, gets everybody nowhere fast. Next libel up, white European colonizer. 3 bad words in a row. This one's by far the easiest to debunk because it's so ludicrously untrue. Let's start with white. First of all, Jews aren't white. We're not technically a race at all, as we precede and exceed this Western social construct. Moreover, the majority of Israel's population doesn't even present as white. These are people from Ethiopia, Morocco, Yemen, Algeria, Asia, South America, all over the globe. Anyone who has spent 5 minutes on the Tel Aviv Tayelet knows this very well. As we just established, modern-day Israelis came from all over, not just from Europe, and there have been Jews living in the land continuously for centuries well before it became a state. And of course, Jews are not from Europe. Jews are from Judea, which is modern-day Israel. You cannot colonize a place you are from. There is no other land to which Jews as a collective are connected. Every Muslim site in the land is literally built on top of a Jewish one. A state founded by an indigenous people who either already lived there or were returning from exile, without a mother empire, mostly fleeing as refugees for survival, does not meet the definition of settler colonialism by any stretch of the imagination. Arabs, on the other hand, are from Arabia, which, I don't need to tell you, is not in Israel. There's a reason there are 57 Muslim-majority countries across Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. That's some damn effective colonizing. And there's a second layer of inversion here, because this particular libel allows white Westerners to scratch the itch of their massive white guilt, taking out their own shame on those pesky Jews thousands of miles away. These lost leftists have been tricked into believing that they are personally responsible for the American colonialism of ages past, for slavery, for things not even their great-great-great-grandparents were even alive for. Even white-presenting Jews, whose families came here as destitute Yiddish-speaking immigrants 100 years ago, feel they're responsible for stuff that happened in a country their families weren't even living in. This is why the progressive response to white guilt is never more than performative, because it's not a genuine, internally motivated guilt. It is an external guilt thrust upon them, meant to satisfy somebody else's gaze. So even if they want to do the right thing in the eyes of their peers, unconsciously, there's only so far they're willing to go. This is how you end up with millions of hypocrites who call Israelis white European colonizers who should return stolen land, while they are in fact the white European colonizers who live on stolen land. As for the kernel of truth, it's honestly a stretch, but sure, about half of the Jews present when Israel became a state in 1948 were from Europe. Okay, not only is Israel not a colonizing entity, it actually represents the most successful decolonization movement ever, a return to sovereignty for an indigenous people who'd been deprived of it for thousands of years. Our next libel is a more recent addition to the canon, a social media darling gracing the comments section of every Jewish account from Bubbies to bagel shops. I'm speaking, of course, of Baby Killer. Jarring even to say. This time, I want to start with the kernel of truth because this one is critical to acknowledge. As is tragically the case with every single army in human history, some soldiers lose their way in the fog of war, and whether out of vengeance or immaturity or exhaustion or hunger for power or darkness, atrocities are committed. I am sure there has been more than one innocent child killed by a rogue Israeli soldier during this war. I don't know how many or under what circumstance, but I am sure, as I would be in any war, that the number is more than zero. And anyone who commits such an unforgivable crime should be punished on earth and in heaven. There has been no way to forensically verify any of the accusations that have come out of Gaza, but probability alone leads me to believe that at least one of them is true. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 50. And if you want to talk about those incidents, fine, let's talk about them. But to categorize as baby killers the entire 400,000 person IDF, or the entire population of Israel, or any Israel-supporting random Jew anywhere on earth is a purposefully disingenuous punch below the belt meant solely to demonize and ostracize Jews. I'm going to describe two cultures side by side. You tell me what you think is more likely to be baby killers. One teaches their youth that the greatest aim in life is to die in the killing of their enemies. The other teaches that the goal of life is to make the world a better place. One encourages their youth to blow themselves up in order to murder innocent people. The other is willing to release literally thousands of enemy prisoners to save a single life. One withholds aid from its own people so it can sell it to them for a profit. The other has likely facilitated the transfer of more aid to an enemy population during active combat than any army in modern history. One hides its weapons in children's bedrooms, hospitals, and kindergartens. The other coordinates access to hundreds of thousands of polio vaccines for the very children they're accused of targeting. One army exists for the sole purpose of killing their enemies. The other, 75% of which are reservists in their 30s and 40s who left their regular-ass jobs and spouses and children for this, exists solely for the purpose of defending their own people. But let's not beat around the bush. If we're talking killing kids as a matter of policy, one side actually does that. Hamas wages war by hiding themselves and hostages and weapons among and directly underneath civilian populations. The entire aim of Hamas military strategy is for their own civilians to be killed. They attack Israel, draw their fire, hide, force civilians to remain in place, and wait for them to die. They have 500 miles of underground shelter, enough to safeguard every child in Gaza and then some, except they don't because they don't want to. They want the kids to die. Why? So Israel will look bad and people will call them baby killers. And on October 7th, Hamas butchered every single baby they came across, in their cribs, in their mother's arms, in their mother's bellies, in cold blood. The Palestinians are the actual baby killers as a matter of deliberate strategy. The very horror they accuse Jews of, they get away with. And the denial of this horrific truth is what makes this particular libel especially painful. That's it for part 1 of Deconstructing Anti-Zionist Libels. Next week, I'll wrap things up with the final 2, including the big libel. So hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss it, and I'll see you right back here for part 2.